Hello, good evening, and welcome to today's episode of Spergonomics. With us is not Alcazar. He is not here, unfortunately. He may make it, he may not. We don't care. No, I'm joking. But with me is, of course... Ouch, Kazai. With us is, as usual, Mr. Big Irony himself, Chicago liberal.
Yes.
Yes.
Hi.
And with us is our guest. We would call you Mac, but we already have like two Macs who've been on. So I'm going to call you Kenziepuff. Is that all right?
Yeah, that's perfect.
That's what I put in the title. I didn't know what to call you. Because if I said Mac, they would have been... Everyone watching would be like, what? Which Mac? Italian Mac? Or Anglo? What, is he an Anglo? I don't know what the other Mac is.
No, he's from Baltimore.
I know, but is he an Anglo-American? You know what I mean.
I don't know.
Oh well, doesn't matter. Italian Mac or just Mac? We didn't know, so I put it as Kenziepuff.
Wait, we have an Italian Mac?
Yeah, isn't he Italian? Oh, is he Joe? Oh, he's called Joe,
What?
isn't he? Oof, never mind. Sorry, Lancerus, I thought your name was Mac. Bruh. Anyway, so Kenzie, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself before we get into the actual stream? What is it you do?
Well, I exist on Twitter and YouTube. Before
How do we know that you actually exist?
Oh, I mean, I could plug myself, but I thought that would be a little rude.
Well, you're the guest. You can plug
Feel
away.
free.
My Twitter handle is @_Kenziepuff. It's KENZIEPUFF. I've had that handle since 2009, which is pretty crazy these days to have a handle that long on Twitter tweeting what we do.
Mine's that age as well.
Oh yeah, we actually joined Twitter the same month
Bloody hell.
in the same year.
Oof.
Yeah.
I hate Twitter.
So, me too. So I was basically completely philosophically and politically apathetic pre 2015-ish. And then when I was in college, I got involved with Young Americans for Liberty here in the U.S., which started out of Students for Ron Paul.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't even know who Ron Paul was at the time. That's how far gone I was. I was like, who's Ron Paul? And everyone gasped in horror. What do you mean, who's Ron Paul? So, yeah, it all started from there, and I just kept exploring libertarianism because I thought that Democrats and Republicans were absolutely... And I didn't get into politics because of that, but then I met a few friends in my Young Americans for Liberty chapter in college and started traveling to different conventions with Young Americans for Liberty and meeting all kinds of people. And then I eventually, a few years ago, stumbled across the Mises Institute, and I went anarcho-capitalist. So it's kind of just from there. I've met a lot of cool people and had a lot of cool podcasts. That's where I'm at.
A very typical progression, I would say, in libertarianism. You go from one end to the other. Now, hopefully you don't go down the wrong pipeline, like a lot of people have. So anyway...
Yeah, I'm always hearing about these pipelines, but...
I mean, it does exist, technically speaking, but I think there's actually...
yeah.
I'd say there's the bigger one is the libertarian to communist pipeline, I would say. Considering all the people who've come out against the so-called libertarian to alt-right pipeline, why are there so many of them communists nowadays? I don't know. Or social
There's more
democrats.
pipelines from libertarianism than the average sewage system at this point.
There is. In fact, you could probably argue you're more likely to be a propertarian from a libertarian point of view than to become an alt-righter. I don't know. That's just what I've noticed. But anyway, so Chicago, please tell the people what we're doing on today's stream.
Oh, we're debating privatizing things that the government usually does. In the wake of the things that are going on in the United States. But we'll be talking a lot more about, well, than just privatizing police and law and order, but also other things that the states does.
So that would be
So,
like...
do you want me to go and introduce the first topic then?
Yes, please do.
Things like defense, education, healthcare, infrastructure. All right, well, we should go and start off with the first topic, national defense. What should and shouldn't be privatized, and why?
Well, I personally don't think the army should be privatized. At least the army itself. But the people who make the guns, I don't see why they should be. Hello? You still there, guys?
Hello? Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
It might be me.
Yeah, you might be slightly breaking up, but in my opinion, there's different arguments that are in favor of privatizing at least parts of the armed forces. For example, you can go and look at how the Continental Army worked in the 1770s. It was mainly actually local militias that were under the elected command of various individuals. And hey, we beat you, so it must work.
Well, I would counter that there was also a regular army alongside that, and the militias were largely not the ones who fought in the main battles. It was mostly the regular Continental Army. So, like, the guys in the blue uniforms would be regular soldiers. Akin to the redcoats of the British Army.
I guess, but the way that the regular army was actually made was actually through various individuals who would then volunteer their militias, and then they would become regular army.
Okay, fair enough.
And then, after various battles, would revert back to being regular militia.
Mm-hmm.
Or be slaughtered to a man, depending on the regiment.
Yeah, the British tradition is you have a small standing army, and they're not garrisoned in like how do I explain what was the tradition? How do I explain this? Well, the main issue is they don't stay in your house like we did in America, for example. That was one of the main contentions, because there was this garrison law or lodging law, I forgot what it was called. But primarily you'd have a small army because we were suspicious of the power of a massive army, like you could get in, for example, Prussia or France under Napoleon. Well, France in general, really, and Spain, which could be used for wrong because the whole checks and balances kind of thing, liberty, and I feel like, but it was never privatized. It was always nationalized, but the difference was it was never loyal to. I think this is how it works. It's never ever been loyal to Parliament, but it's always been loyal to the crown, and I guess that's a way of keeping things somewhat stable and in equilibrium in the system. So whereas the people would be represented by Parliament and they'll have their side mostly, which I think was how it really. Well, I'm not sure about the Civil War. But the crown, and also it has all the legislative and executive power, because eventually the king or the queen, whatever, became a non-entity in that regard. They still have the army, which creates a kind of balancing act, but it's not that balanced. But whatever. But anyway, should we talk about like the pros and cons of a nationalised and also privatised army? Would you say?
Yeah, sure.
So what are the pros of a nationalised army? Would you say, guys?
Well, the pros of a nationalized army is, frankly, it is far more centralized and more able to go and adapt to various threats. Mm-hmm. For example, the dawn of the nuclear era.
Mm-hmm. I would also add that its command structure is easier to create because armies aren't best when they're democratic. It's best when they are, I guess. You would say it's authoritarian, but it's not. It's just incredibly hierarchical.
When it's a harsh meritocracy.
Yeah, harsh.
Basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, you do not want weak links in charge.
Mm-hmm. You don't want weak links. And you need it to be as simple as possible as well. You don't want it to be too divided, otherwise it would be too atomized, and it would just... How are you supposed to coordinate units all together? I mean, it's hard enough now in modern warfare where battles are on a larger scale than they would have been, say, 2,000 years ago, where it was citizen militias in like a Greek city-state, for example. So it seems to me like it has to be centralized almost. But
definitely. But then there's also the digital aspect of warfare, which does somewhat allow things to be more decentralized. Mm-hmm. So then more people get access to greater information simultaneously.
So would that be like drones and things like that? Or is
Yeah,
that
so
separate?
for example, if you are an infantryman trying to go and storm a compound, you can then go and have full access to the recon feed of a drone overhead. And then you can also go and call in an airstrike if needed, and you don't have to go through a general on the top of the chain of commands to do it.
Well, usually in like ideal situations, it would be you just use your own initiative. That's the ideal, isn't it? So it wouldn't be you have to go all the way up to say the major, for example, for permission to bomb. It would be we've got this target here. We need to bomb this area, and then obviously it would probably be the lieutenant or captain in charge that would order the bombing or something. It wouldn't be as crazy as that, but I guess that would be amongst a more privatized, atomized systems that they don't need that permission. Would you say?
Yeah. Well, and also that is how warfare was fought during World War II. You would need to get the general's permission. So that's why the general would always be with the frontline forces.
So Kenzie, have you got anything to add?
Well, the first thing I go to when talking about privatizing military defense, any of that, I usually just say defense in general. My argument, the reason why I hold most of the position.
Oh, roboting a bit there. I think I may be alone. Are you still there?
Oh
Chicago?
dear.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, I'm here.
F in the chat, guys. Kenzie's gone for a while. Well, I think she's still on the call, though. So it might just be a case of catching up. It might be me, though. It might be, as Fox Troika said in the chat, it's probably Discord as well. Let me have a look. Is there any way we can I can change? I can't change anything. You might have to change the server address, maybe.
That's U.S. Central, so it should be closest to her.
Sometimes you don't even need to. Like Brazil usually works, believe it or not.
Brazil?
Yeah, it
All
does,
right.
trust me. Until it stops working and you have to go somewhere else, but...
yeah, it works until it doesn't.
Works until it doesn't, indeed.
Yeah, I'll go and send her a message real quick. Sorry about this, guys.
Don't worry about it. We can still talk about... Let's go into the private army. So what would you say is a pro of a private army?
Well, pro the private army would be the military is not beholden to what Congress wants, so therefore it can't be used to aggress on the civilian population. And also then it's not involved in the politics of the federal level or even the state level, which that in and of itself can be quite important. Well, and also that does force people to be more involved in their community, especially defense-wise. And it allows people to go and be able to take up arms against the police if seems that Matt has lost sound.
Oh, she's lost sound, right.
And she can't hear us either.
Oh, message her and say, go into your... Well, first try going in and out, and if that doesn't work, go into user settings, then voice and video, and just, like, reset voice settings at the very bottom.
Apparently it's your internet connection, so...
Mine or hers? Or...
No, hers.
Oh, okay,
hers.
well, she'll probably have to restart the modem or whatever. But anyway, we can carry on until she comes back because the show must go on, obviously. All right.
Yeah.
So
well, this is unfortunate.
So what I gathered from what you said was that in many ways, oh, can you still hear us now?
Yes, I jumped in and jumped out, and now I'm back. So.
Dab.
All right, perfect.
Oh.
So what were you saying about your arguments for private defense?
What you sounded like you were saying was, in many ways, it could also what I got from it is that it creates like an armed populace because it would have to be, it can't just be people who are assigned to a particular unit and the unit would be like a company. It would be But I'm not trying to make a pun there, but it would be basically like a militia, so everybody has to be involved, kind of like the Romans, like their manipular system. It was everybody in that particular Roman town, or even Rome itself, or in the countryside, and they would be brought up to fight. So it incentivizes an armed populace, which makes it more harder to invade your country in many ways. But of course, you don't necessarily need a privatized. Oh, you're echoing me again.
Damn it.
I know. So it would. I mean, you don't necessarily need a private army for that, because America is a prime example of that. The army is centralized and nationalized, but the population is armed. But it would mean that it would be more like Switzerland. Switzerland is like that to some extent, I guess. What would you say?
Well, I think I'm gonna let Mac argue her point because I argued mine.
Go on, Mac. What were you going to say earlier?
Oh, as far as what I was saying, well, you guys are talking the practical side of it, which of course we need to bring libertarians down to earth on. But I was just making the argument that, at least from what I found when talking to people about it, they're worried about two things: the practical side, and then they wonder why, even in the first place, you would want to privatize defense or military or anything like that. And I always bring up the myth of the national defense with them, book-wise, but just conversation-wise, I just try to bring up that for most people when talking about these issues, it's not just, being boogaloo boys and going all crazy and wanting to be vigilantes. It's more the fact that it's just the moral position as far as from an anarcho-capitalist perspective to create a private law society and not have people be forced to pay for conflicts that they don't believe in, or just defense of other people in general, as far as having government overreaching, forcing people to pay for those things.
Okay. Then what makes national defense a myth in your minds then?
It's not the fact that there isn't a nation. I think that's actually a lot of things that ANCAPs seem to be a little funky on to me. Because if you tell most people there's not a nation, they, it's usually coming from a more lefty perspective, getting triggered about nationalism and all that, which isn't necessarily true. And even Rothbard distinguished between nation and nation state and things like that. But for me, it's more about allowing communities to make their own choices about the defense of their communities, rather than having government force inflict or force them to have a particular type of force that might not be effective in their community. So, right it's now usually we're seeing, obviously the police aren't national, they're local, but we see with the military, people are being forced to pay for conflicts that they don't believe in, under the guise of defending the nation, when in fact most of the conflicts we've been in, at least as I've been alive, have not been justified for any reason and have actually made us be in far more danger than we would have been if we would have never entered the conflicts. So
yeah, that actually also brings up an interesting point for when my dad was a kid, since he grew up in Okinawa, so that was where all of the B-52s that bombed North Vietnam were. And because of that, he actually had the threat when he was growing up of either China or the Soviet Union striking Okinawa, which at the time didn't have U.S. citizens on it. So that does bring up the point of, yeah, sometimes national defense will get innocent people killed for really stupid reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Although that's not necessarily the army's fault, because the army is just the tool. They're just
True.
A way to exert power and force. And they just made. And even the generals themselves don't have. I don't think they even have the legislative ability to go and tell the higher ups, yeah, we should go bomb them. I suppose they can advise, but they don't have the power. It seems to me that it's people within government. I guess.
Yeah.
Maybe
true.
Do the army lobby? I don't. Maybe they do, but I don't. I think they usually lobby for funding rather than they do for conquest or anything like that. That's more
At the time, I think those airstrikes were mainly ordered by General Westmoreland instead of by Nixon, which that was in the 70s, and I'm talking about the 60s. And there's also the fact that there were a lot more air bases than just Kadena Air Force Base in Okinawa. For example, there were Air Force bases in Guam and the Philippines, which could have been used, and those actually were U.S. soil. At least that area in the Philippines that had Guam fully was. So there's an argument there.
You know, when you said that your dad grew up on Okinawa, where all the B-52s were, I thought you were going to mention Nagasaki for a second.
Oh yeah, and also Okinawa was kind of burned to a crisp during World War II.
Yeah,
So
that was because of the Imperial Japanese Army refusing to surrender. Also, yeah, I didn't ignore the super chat from British Knight. Put me on a one-way train to Ancapistan. So what about...
I'm okay with this.
So what about, say, weapons manufacturing? So do you think the army should be able to create their own weapons, or should the industry itself be nationalised, or should it remain privatised and people compete for contracts in the government?
Oh, obviously the industry should be privatized. I mean, look at how great privatized industry worked for the U.S. in World War II. The Ford Motor Company alone built over 12,000 aircraft. Yeah, that was all in one plant in Michigan as well.
But was that during World War II, did you say?
Yep, 1942 to 1945. Willow Run Assembly.
Wasn't it temporarily nationalised in America? Because it was over here in the United Kingdom.
No.
Everything was put under central control. I mean, understandably so, from where we were. We were in the middle of the hot zone in Europe, so I guess everything kind of had to be temporarily centrally planned. So in America, it was still largely...
For us, we had the War Production Board, which awarded contracts, but everything else was privately done.
Okay.
Especially the designing of different weapon systems, especially aircraft.
I mean, I might be over exaggerating what happened in World War II, but I know that there was still contracts and people trying to compete with weapons design. So, for example, the Sten gun probably was not a gun designed down in committee, if I remember correctly, and I know for a fact that the Enfield wasn't. But I think even now, to this day, we still have some companies that are not private. I think BAE, the ones who did the Eurofighter.
Yeah,
Typhoon
BAE
and all that,
Systems is very privatized.
Oh, are they
privatized?
In fact,
it's now... In fact, we can thank BAE Systems for the Bradley fighting vehicle.
Oh, I thought they were still nationalised. I guess I was wrong, because I know some certain parts of making weapons in this country is still nationalised. I think Enfield, maybe, or maybe BAE own them now. It's been a while since I've been looking into this. But yeah,
I think Enfield no longer exists because it was Royal Small Arms Factory Enfield.
Yeah. So what do you think is the cons of doing it that way? Even though we can see the ability of the Ford factory, for example, and Rolls-Royce, for example.
Well, the con is
here,
if you have no bid contracts, everything's going to be very overpriced. Just look at the U.S. military-industrial complex. Several $1,000s for a toilet at an airbase? No, thank you.
Another thing is when it's all nationalised is that becomes your economy, basically. Like the USSR, in the end, when they were centrally planning it, all they could build was tanks and rockets and guns and things like that. They didn't even have the expertise or even the willpower above at the top end of the central planning committee to even make consumer goods, and that's one of the reasons why
you can also look at the Brezhnev era during the Soviet Union, when instead of building any sort of civilian goods, which would have actually saved the Soviet economy somewhat, they built nothing but military goods. So then the Soviet economy heavily stagnated and eventually resulted in the USSR no longer existing.
I will say though that when you're in dire straits like my country was, nationalising it will work. In a war zone like Britain was, because by then things have to be done like that, at least temporarily.
Well, yes, but then what kind of political willpower is there to go and denationalize it if it's making such a profit?
They did to some
extent.
extent.
Not coal and steel. They actually nationalized that further.
Not coal and steel, but they did for quite a few other industries. But I agree. Like the temptation there is to then, well, I mean, this is what Hayek was saying in the Road to Serfdom, for example. Like, we've got a centrally planned system now, and all the Keynesians are happy and giddy that this is their biggest dreams are finally being made. But what happens afterwards? The temptation to grab further control is too tempting for a state, as they say. So that's the pitfalls of nationalisation. Even though the upside is that things, at least in a crisis, get done. But even then, like, actually no, that's off topic. Actually, I was going to talk about agriculture then, but that's completely off topic. Even though it's to do with the war. But anything else you guys want to add before we move on?
Well, there's definitely the topic of nuclear weapons.
Sure, yeah.
Should that be privatized? For me, I would actually say no.
So you don't want
because of just how expensive just because of how expensive nuclear weapons are. Especially things like bombs. Those things cost maintain over 5 years in their actual building. So, that's why we don't build many bombers anymore.
How much was it again? Because you were roboting a bit. Do you want to give us some numbers so we can get like a bit of scale?
Let me go and look up how much a B-52 costs to maintain.
Because I know Trident is still very expensive for us over here. Oh, is something British Knight is interesting. After the SA-80 L9A1 was botched due to being rushed through production, which it was, yeah. Royal Small Arms Factory Enfield was privatised and then shut down. The A2 and A3 are German made. Oh no, we can't be having that. We can't be having that. I mean, yeah, I know the FAL, which we based the L1A1 on. I mean, they're actually the same weapon, but with some differences. At least we did make our own. Oh, that's just sad. I mean, they're thinking about replacing it in 2025. It'd be interesting to see what road we go down now after Brexit. That'll be very interesting. And I think there was something I wanted to add though in regard to why you're still looking for the numbers. With national defence and national interest, and how a big nationalised army can end up doing things that the people don't want it to do. So, for example, going overseas and fighting wars that they don't want to fight. That's more to do with being a great power or a superpower, call it what you will, an empire. You have interests all over the world and allies all over the world, and they have their own interests as well, and it's in their interest for you to go over there and fight for them or fight with them in many ways. And also you have things that can't be fixed via diplomacy, unfortunately, or at least you think you've exhausted all other options, and therefore you have to fight. So on the surface, it may seem completely pointless and useless, but in terms of what the people at the top are doing, trying to keep America in power as the number one superpower, you can see how to them it might not be completely wasted and useless wars. But I don't know. I think that's just being a big country with interests all over the world. Like if you're a smaller country. By the way, go on. Yeah.
I finally got some numbers for you for how much a B-52 costs to maintain. So for every hour that one is flying, it costs $11,281 to maintain that.
Jesus.
Wow.
So for a 12-hour mission, that's $135,372.
Oof.
And that's without taking into consideration any bombs on board.
Mm-hmm. That's just running the fuel, getting it out there, things like that, maintenance.
And also ensuring that the engines don't explode.
Like, for example, a random duck flies into it. Like that which happens a lot, by the way, to planes.
Yeah.
Yikes.
That's actually why you have to go and test engines very vigorously to go and ensure that if a duck impacts the engine doesn't explode. Which was an issue with Rolls-Royce in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah. I know it well. But
yeah.
I think I'll just finish with my last point. That if you're a smaller country, that's not much of a problem. Especially if I know Switzerland is their whole bloody culture is about neutrality. But smaller countries don't tend to go fighting bigger countries or even other smaller countries, they tend to keep to themselves because there's less incentive to fight, and also they don't have global interests in the way that an empire would anyway. So anyway, what's next on your list, Chicago?
Let me go and check again.
I think one of them...
education.
Education. Oh, this is going to be a difficult one. So,
very.
What are the pros for privatizing education then? Which is, at the very least, having
Well,
it.
for starters, the state doesn't... Well, for starters, then you get to learn a more holistic view of history instead of just what the state wants you to know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in the US, for elementary school and middle school, they make sure that you are insanely patriotic.
Mm-hmm.
And then in high school, they tell you about everything bad that happens, and then you become a socialist.
So there is a disconnect between the various different kinds of the educational system.
Yeah.
It
basically is... Well, basically changes on what the state wants you to think.
Mm-hmm.
Which, to me, I see that as a form of intellectual slavery.
The reverse would be that it could be used to help create a more monofilm culture, so like people all are educated the same, they're all influenced by the same thing, for example, outside of the home. So if they're taught to be American, they're more likely to be American, for example, or like in Switzerland, or in like let's not use Switzerland, Turkey, for example. They used to be they're educated to be good citizens, shall we say, Turkish citizens. That would be the. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But at the same time, what use is it to go and be a good citizen if the regime has to go and lie to you on what history is actually like for you to be a good citizen?
I mean, again, you can just look at example Turkey. They teach their citizens, they brainwash them into thinking that they didn't genocide the Armenians, but obviously they did. Or the very least,
that sounds like a massive con to me instead of a pro.
So, Mac, have you got anything to say as well?
Yeah. Well, as far as education goes and what the pros and cons are of the state being in charge of it or not, obviously the U.S. model is based off of the Prussian model, which, like you were talking about, is to make a good citizen, docile workers that are easily moldable just in case they need them for the army, which obviously, I mean, a lot of people here in the States talk about the public school to military pipeline that a lot of kids go through, which obviously proves that the way that they set up the system is working, which, depending on what your view is a good thing or not. But I think I get the argument, the good citizen argument, when I think about it from like a devil's advocate perspective. But on the other hand, I think there's other ways of creating a cohesive community and country without the emphasis being on an education system that's run by the state. I think there's other ways to create cohesion in society than all the kids being away from their parents 8 hours a day, learning the same side of history that the government wants them to learn.
So what about So what about, say, if it was privatized, for example, completely? There would be more choice. Would you say that the argument would be? Because then you can, if you're a Catholic, you can decide, well, I could just send my kid to a Catholic school, or if you're Church of England, I can just send them to a Church of England school, which I guess we still do today, but they're not all the religious schools are necessarily private. I think a lot of them are actually state schools. I know that the sixth form college that I went to...
Well, you can also send them to homeschool and
we'll
not have massive penalties on that.
We'll get into that, but what I was going to say was, if you want a more conservative school or a more liberal school, you can send your kids there. Again, there's nothing stopping somebody from creating that kind of school. I think they existed even back in the day in this country, for example. So I guess if it's completely privatised, there is more choice. But then the question would be price, and how do we get poor students into these schools, for example? So how would you retort to the person who wants universal education? How would you make it cheaper for people to, even from the poorest backgrounds, to get their kids into school, and obviously in upward mobility?
Well, that's quite simple, actually. The taxes that you have to go and pay to go and send your children to school now aren't being paid. So instead, you pay that money to go and send them to a private school. Because there's always going to be incentive for those schools to go and have more students. So they're going to try and have the lowest cost possible with the highest degree of success possible.
Yeah, and another argument for as far as how would you lower cost and ensure that everybody is getting the chance at education is to, I know a lot of people talk about the voucher programs, but even if you don't go into that and think that we should implement that, just the simple fact that kids and their family, their parents really, would be able to choose where they went. I know a lot of places in the States, especially with public school. I went to private school, so that's where I'm speaking from, just so people have that background. You're tied to your address. So if you go to a bad school, you go to a bad school. And unfortunately, a lot of the bad schools coordinate with the poorest neighborhoods, unfortunately. So freeing things up and privatizing them and allowing people the choice would actually provide market incentives for schools to.
In this country, we're not tied to our address, even though it's nationalized. Because I went to a school that was way outside my address, and my sister went to a different school than I did, and that was, even though it was closer, it was still outside the address. It was we did not live in that area, although we lived right next to it. But so we have choice here, even though it's not necessarily, even though it's not all schools are necessarily privatized. So it depends really on the system as well. And that sounds strange to me that you'd have a system where it's tied exactly to address. But then again, when there's bad schools in that address and it's a poor community, it just makes you wonder, doesn't it? Are they just trying to keep those people poor? Rather than allow them to go to another school?
Sound
it's like, literally...
Like, even saying it out loud, it just sounds really, it sounds like a conspiracy theory. Like, no, why would they tie those people to those neighborhoods and not just allow them to pick? But it's really strange. I've had a lot of conversations with people where they say, well, no, there's nothing wrong with that. Then you're a part of a community and all this. And
you could literally live on like a county line or an area line, whatever. Because I used to live on the border of an area in my city. And because I happen to live on the other side, therefore, I can't go to this other school that I'm in walking distance to, which doesn't make sense, does it? I don't know if it's
that's
that
actually
bad,
exactly how I ended up, because I went to public school, especially for high school, and there was actually this school that was only 10 minutes walking distance from me. So, what does the state of Illinois do? Have to go to a school in another suburb, which is half an hour driving distance away.
Because you share the same address, as in like postcode, or you call it an area code, don't you, or something like that?
Yeah, the people on the other side of my street, however, went to the other high school.
So it was assigned by lot, almost. That's crazy. Oh wait, no, they're in a different area, aren't they? Right, yeah. I almost got that confused then. That's crazy. I've never known a system like that, because we just don't do that here. Also, I used to live near... Well,
do they have school districts in Britain?
No, I don't think so.
That's why.
I mean,
we have school districts in the US.
Well, I know that the religious side of things, like Catholic schools and Protestant schools, they have a diocese is a Catholic thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, even the Church of England have their own like jurisdictions, but I don't know if, because you live in that area where that school is, and you want to go to the religious school, you can only go there. But as far as I'm aware, that's not the case. But I don't think we have school districts, although we do have councils, Manchester Council, London Council, things like that. But, well, it's not London or Manchester Council. Even the local areas in those cities will have councils, usually. So they probably deal with that kind of stuff anyway. But that seems like a really weird system that just doesn't seem to work. It just seems to go against common sense, even for the state. Like, we don't do that here. So anyway, let's talk about parents as well, because... So what's the pros for parents if it's nationalized, would you say?
Well, if it's nationalized, allegedly it's cheaper,
Mm-hmm.
and it's one also for some people having less choice is actually what they prefer.
Mm.
So then they don't have to go and mull about um, which school to go and send their children. So instead, they just send their children to the one school that they're supposed to.
Mm-hmm.
So then it's just easier for them. So I guess the pro is it's more out of convenience.
Mm.
But I don't really buy into that
Yeah, I
argument
don't
personally.
buy
Yeah.
That
Over
makes me
here.
immensely triggered.
Over here, though, if you live in the same community for years and years and years, you go to the same school as your parents did. Usually, I don't know if that's out of convenience or they just like the school when they grew up. But that I've known a lot of people whose family all went to this school for generations. For example, that's what a lot of people do over here. So, what about the pros to the parents if it's private, for example?
More choice,
Mm-hmm.
might even be cheaper.
Mm-hmm.
They also have a slightly more say in what their children learn,
Mm-hmm.
which can actually be a very good thing.
And more say in like where the money goes in that school, because we even in this
Oh,
country,
definitely.
with state schools,
Because
there
then the
are
school districts actually have to go and listen to parents a lot more because of the parents-teacher associations.
although as far as I'm aware in my country, even though there's more state schools than private, as far as I know, there's still like councils and parents committees. I forgot what they called it now when I went to school, but the parents were invited to meetings every year. But I don't know how. Maybe it was every month, not every year. But I forgot what they called it. But the parents would have say back then anyway. They would have a say, and now they're trying the academy route. So like a community can get together, try and apply for funds to set up their own school. That's apparently how the system's meant to work. But they're also just converting grammar schools into academies, and I don't think the system is very good, and I don't think it's superior to the grammar school system. But that's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
But it seems like over there, the parents don't have much of a voice. Would you say?
Yeah. For the
Sorry, guys.
states, yeah, I would say that the parents really do not have much of a say at all in what their children learn because that is all decided at the state level at the Department of Education,
Mm-hmm.
which, frankly, I heavily disagree with a lot I've learned, especially for my AP government class and history classes,
So
because it was just way too narrow-minded and
Yeah.
dogmatic.
although I didn't find my school at the time anyway to be like that, but I don't know. Maybe that's just in hindsight. But what about homeschooling?
Yeah.
Should
Well,
that
in
be?
homeschooling, that's when the parents have a massive degree of control on what their children learn and how they
Should the
learn
state help them with their needs, or should it be left to the parents and the companies to arrange how they're going to get textbooks and things like that?
I think it should be left to the parents, but I don't see why companies would be meddling in this. Especially if the parents don't want the companies meddling in it at all.
I just mean in terms of getting supplies and stuff, so like pencils, textbooks, not like education, just like making it easier.
Well, I mean, for the US, I had to go and purchase almost all of that stuff with my own money anyway.
Yeah.
So I don't see much of a difference.
Yeah, I guess so. It's the same as teaching yourself a subject, but you're teaching somebody else. Also, British Knight gave me some interesting info. You can go to whatever primary school you want, but your secondary education is tied to which primary school you went to. This only changes if you move out. Ah, okay. Interesting. But I wasn't in the same area. I wasn't in the same area that my secondary school was in. I don't know. I was in the same... I was in the same area, but not the same postcode. So where I used to live was called Trafford, and the school was in Trafford, but it was miles away. I don't know. Maybe that's what British Knight must mean. Yeah, so it is the same area. Maybe because of that, I couldn't go to, say, another academy, the academy in the centre of town. But then I saw people from my primary school go there, so I don't know. Maybe they were moving to do that. So anyway, What's the next on the list? Because we're actually rapidly approaching time.
We can go overtime for this one. I think it's a special occasion anyway.
Sure, yeah. 30 minutes more overtime, would you say?
Well, we are now currently 1/3 through, so...
Well, that's not too bad. We're nearly
Yeah.
halfway there. So,
Well, the next one is Law and Order,
ooh, go on
which I think you already know myself and Kenziepuff's opinion that private law society is just objectively superior.
then. So do you want to go in through those reasons? 'Cause
Well,
I
for
definitely
starters, the
don't
states
trust it.
doesn't gets to go and preside over the torts, which means that when you sue the states, they cannot just rig the system against you for them to win,
Mm-hmm.
which they very provably do.
Mm-hmm.
And also, it does mean that there's a higher emphasis on things like property rights. I mean, just look at the Wild West. That was actually a private law society, in a way, with all the property associations. And also, of course, when you privatize law and order, this means you privatize the police.
Mm-hmm.
And in the U.S., that might be necessary now.
So Matt, what do you want to say? Feel free to interject. By the way, you don't have to wait for me.
Oh, I know. I don't want to interrupt. Well, I mean, Chicago pretty much covered it for me. I think on this one where him and I are pretty much in line with that. I think that in many ways, private law society, it would just be. I just go back to the efficiency argument. I mean, yeah, we could argue over if it's more moral or because of taxation and all that, but I think that the more practical people would be more convinced by just talking about how much more efficient it would be than having the government involved in those sorts of things, whether it be with security, as in local police and stuff like that, or having to go to court or arbitrate something. People would be a lot more efficient and moral at the same time, have it be happening in a private law society rather than having the state in charge of things.
My fear is that with a private police force, is that who holds them to account, for example. So if they commit corruption, if they
The customers.
well, what if the customers don't have the power to go and defeat them in battle, for example, or to take them
There's
to task?
actually
The customers can always do something called stop subscribing.
But then they're still
Well,
around
as-
and they're still committing crimes and things. But anyway,
as far as
so like who's going to keep them to task, and also who's going to uphold the contract that you sign with these private police forces? Who's going to enforce that so that they don't renege on that? Because there's no reason why they can't. It's just a piece of paper, right? And if there's nobody enforcing that piece of paper, which is what a state is traditionally meant to do in these cases, then it's just a piece of paper. They can just say, well, actually, you know what? This person's offering us more money. Oh, you know what? We quite
You're roboting pretty hard.
Am I? Oh, okay. Hang on a sec. Do I sound better now?
Yeah.
Okay. Where was I
Yeah.
at before I started roboting?
you're talking about that it's essentially just a piece of paper if it's just between like a security group and customers.
Oh yeah. If there's nothing to if there's if there's no other entity to enforce the rules, for example, so if somebody breaks it, it's up to you to stop them. If you don't have the power to stop them, then you know what's stopping them from just going to another place or just actually taking over your area if they want to, for example. That's my main
Well, then
issue.
I guess the counter argument is what makes the state police different?
Well, they're meant to be more of a. They're meant to anyway to be more of a neutral force when it comes to law and order. So they're not meant to anyway take sides in a situation. They're meant, especially if it's to do with contract law, for example. They're meant to see who's caused. They're meant to investigate who's causing the issue and things like that. And also when it comes to going out there on the streets policing, they need to how do I phrase this? Keep more. I guess it would be when they're keeping the. I can't. Oh God. How do I phrase this? I'm blanking. I can't think what I'm trying to say now.
Guess
Well, the
I
idea is
got
to
you
be a
on this one,
presence.
man.
It's kind of like they're there, but they're not there. If you know what I mean.
I
They
get
don't-
what you're saying.
Yeah, they're there, but they're not
Yeah.
there. Basically, They're there when you need them, but they shouldn't be interjecting themselves into your business. So, like, for example, I know this is probably a thing that they do, but a lot of them, because in Britain especially, they just look into your car while you're driving. Like, you don't need to do that. There's no problems. You know, stop interrupting. You know, stop getting my business.
I mean, sometimes in Chicago, they just shoot you when you're driving.
Bigger iron. So anyway, what else is there then about private and nationalised police forces?
Just your concern, which is that when I was looking into all this, probably the last things that I came to think that should be privatized were military and like local police force, because that's a big thing. I mean, I personally don't depend on the police, but a lot of people do in different communities. So as far as who would hold them accountable, I think Bob Murphy's written some really good stuff on this, and Hoppe has some stuff on it as well. And basically how they put forth how it would work, there would be insurers who would insure either the security company in case something would go wrong, or the customer, and they would be the ones that would hold people accountable. So with government,
but you might as well just have a
theoretically,
government rather than a security, rather than just paying yet more money for a private security team to do that. Surely.
Right. So with government, theoretically how it works is, like you said, they hold themselves accountable and they're there, but you pay taxes obviously for them, but they're not always there.
I didn't say they hold themselves accountable. I was talking more about holding the two sides of the contract accountable. That's what I was saying. What you would, to keep government accountable, you would have to have the judiciary independent of them, which is how it's meant to work in this country and yours. But I was more interested in like more on the ground as opposed to, you know, higher up. Sorry, just thought I'd make that clear. Sorry.
Oh no, you're fine. I think you might have been roboting a bit.
Oh yeah.
But no, okay, I get what you're saying now. Yeah. No, that's fine. I mean, my internet just stopped working early in the stream, so.
Only your sound though. To be fair, you were still on.
Oh really?
Yeah, it was your sound. Yeah, we couldn't hear you, and you couldn't hear us.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good to know. I'll watch out for that. Make sure that doesn't again. Basically, the idea is, with most privatizing things, that to ensure that that didn't happen, it would be competition. So theoretically, between competing private security companies, if you know there's going to be, you know, backlash for not doing your job or not keeping people safe and holding up your end of the contract, then that incentivizes you to do everything within your power to hold up your end of the contract. So with local police, as we have it now in the States, that's technically how it should work. But as we see, police officers are rarely held accountable for things, even when there's video footage of it. And they should be held accountable because everyone just they're kind of in a different class from other citizens almost, at least here in the States, as far as attitudes go. Not legally, obviously, but
that's to do with one of the laws you've got on the books, isn't it? The one that Joe Biden wrote.
Yeah, the laws
the good old crime bill.
Yeah, the crime bill. It's more the crime bill than necessarily the state being biased. Now, maybe they are biased, but I think without the crime bill, there's more incentive to punish them. But go on, sorry, continue.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. I mean, slashing regulations would for sure. I mean, so I'm an ANCAP, but I work with minarchists because I think if we could work towards just slashing regulations and stupid laws like that incentivize officers and local people to be as bad as they can be, that's a huge first step. For me, obviously, I want to privatize it completely, but I think if we can argue that with people and get people to agree, like you just said, like, well, the crime bill incentivizes that a lot. Oh yeah, for sure. But I think, yeah.
Yeah, we're turning into Canadians here.
Are we? Are we turning into Canadians?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we could be from Minnesota, couldn't we? Oh, Wisconsin.
Sorry, I don't mean to sound like Sarah Palin.
Oof.
That's why I had to. That's why I had to get different glasses because I had like the square brown glasses that she wears.
Can you
and
see
I have a
Russia
pointy
from your
face.
house? Oh wait, no, in your case it'd be Mexico.
Not yet.
Where do you live in
Not
Texas?
yet, but maybe soon.
I can't see anything because I live in the Midwest.
Oh.
So. Yeah.
So you just
We see cornfields.
You just see corn in Iowa and maybe Colorado if you're lucky.
Lots of corn.
Yeah.
Oh, Rapier saying Wisconsin accent detected.
Oh. I do not live in Wisconsin.
She does not live in Wisconsin, Rapier. Sorry. I think he is though. You're from Wisconsin, aren't you?
Yeah, he's very much from Wisconsin. He loves to tell me how much the Bears are just a terrible team, which I somewhat agree. But
they are.
Hey, he has
trash.
the Packers.
Yeah, my husband's a Packers fan. Don't get into this with me. Don't get into this with me.
We could get into this.
How's it feel to know that you could have had my quarterback on the Chiefs, but you don't?
How do you respond to that?
Oh. I don't watch football.
Oof.
I'm just from Chicago.
Okay. Well, yeah, but you could be a fan. Oh, actually, a lot of people in Chicago are Packers fans because they know the Bears suck.
Yeah. Well, that and also the Bears had Stephen Hester.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
So it could be far worse for you.
I like how this is.
Anyways.
Yeah, we're off topic here.
Yeah,
it's okay.
Very much
we
so.
need to spurg out occasionally.
Completely shitting on the Chicago Bears aside. One thing that I've always found interesting from people talk about the privatizing police debate is that no one mentions neighborhood.
Yeah.
Even though it is proven to actually work.
Mm-hmm. So,
I'm surprised that no one wants to go and, debate the merits and demerits of the neighborhood watch.
It's not much of a big thing here, even though they do exist. I've obviously never... honestly, even though I once lived in the place where I know for sure there was a neighbourhood watch, because on the windows of the houses there was neighbourhood watch. Maybe that was the alarm system. Maybe they were called that. I don't know. But there was definitely a neighbourhood watch. But my parents weren't a part of it. I know that. But some people were. But I never met who they were. Well, maybe I did meet them, but I didn't. They never said we are neighbourhood watch. And I never saw them patrolling around the area. I don't know. But in America, I know it's almost taken up like a militia kind of thing, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you're in a inner city like the neighborhood watch areas in St. Louis, you kind of need to take a more militaristic approach because of just how unsafe St. Louis actually is. It's almost as bad as Detroit there, crime-wise, actually. Well, at least crime rate-wise. But for neighborhood watch, the reason why I prefer it a lot more than private security companies is that the neighborhood watch consists of people within the community and who are therefore very much held accountable to what they do, but at the same time are also far more trusted because, well, they live in the community and they're pillars of the community. So why not, as a community, trust them?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think neighborhood watches should be given a lot more resources and incentives to form, because sometimes the police, the police aren't like God. They're not omniscient. Well, not yet, anyway. With the security cameras.
Yeah, not yet.
Actually, they probably are, but they're not omnipotent. They're not they can't be everywhere at once. They can only reply to so many calls and send so many police cars and patrols to an area to save somebody or to patrol an area. So why not take a lot of that away from them? Not because they can't be trusted or anything like that, but out of sheer logistics, and let the people do it. And as you say, they can be well trusted. They tend to be pillars of the community, and it seems to work. And it may also keep certain kids from going into crime because they will have, if they don't have a father, they'll at least have somebody to look up to from the neighborhood watch. They will be incentivized to be a sort of surrogate father. In many ways, because you don't want the police or the state to be the father, and you don't want gangsters to be either. You'd rather have it be somebody who is a good person,
or at least tends to be a good person, because there's no such thing as a perfect individual.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I honestly can't think of anything bad about a neighborhood watch. I mean, maybe they can. I think they can get it wrong occasionally, and maybe the armory is an example of them maybe overreaching. But then again, considering the Georgia law there is very particular in how they can act, you could probably see why they chose to do what they did. But I don't know. What
Well,
do you
I
think?
mean, the one thing that could go wrong with the neighborhood watch is their newfound authority getting to their heads. But
vigilantism, yeah.
that's them becoming vigilantes or a
And
racket.
I'm really
But
against the
at the same
vigilantism.
time, well, that's already a problem with police in general. And
Yeah.
since we can't have society without some form of enforcing, well, rules and guidelines of some sort, well, it's just going to have to be something that has to be dealt with, and hopefully the community will rein in those excesses.
You know what's crazy? I don't know if it was Chicago or it was St. Louis. It may be a completely different city, but at one point, the mafia, or the very least street gangs, were becoming neighborhood watch because of the riots.
You know, actually, in Chicago, Al Capone ran the city more than the Chicago mayor did in the 30s.
Yeah, he did. And that's why people liked him, and how he could get away with his crimes, because people were like, well...
But he was a major philanthropist.
Yeah,
the only time people actually started to not like him was when he massacred people on St. Valentine's Day.
If you want the grisly details of that, go on Count Dankula's Mad Lads video, guys.
Yep.
So let's move on, I think, because time is a pressing.
Okay, next topic. Healthcare.
Ooh.
I bet you have a lot to say about the NHS, Mitch.
I do, but I don't want to get into them. Oh. Not at the moment. All I'll say is they don't work. I mean, yes, it's very nice for me to be able to walk in and get treatment for most things. Not everything. They don't cover everything. I don't think there's a single healthcare system in the world that covers everything. Through your taxes. But yeah.
Well, I mean, there's something called insurance, which in a way does cover everything, but then you have to go and pay some of the cost.
In your country, you have Medicaid, don't you? That's basically health insurance, right?
We have Medicare and Medicaid. Which
is that a difference? Yeah.
The issue is, ever since the 1960s when those two were introduced, healthcare costs have skyrocketed as a result because, well, now insurance companies know that the government is going to constantly subsidize costs more, so now they can have higher premiums.
Do you want to explain, how it works as simple as possible, which is probably not easy?
I don't even know how it works, man.
Mac, do you know? Or is it just as mystifying to you as it is to Chicago?
Medicare and Medicaid?
Yeah.
Oh, like how you apply for them,
Not just
or
how it works,
get the money and stuff like that?
Just how it works in general, how it's meant to work.
Well, Medicare, the purpose of Medicare is for medical coverage for people, I think it's 65 and older, or with a disability. So, and I don't believe it has anything to do with income level. It's just designed for people with usually people who have a limited income use it. But a lot of people, well, how it's supposed to work is it's supposed to be a last resort for people to use who don't have anything. But unfortunately, a lot of people are on it for a multitude of reasons that probably don't even use it. Medicaid. So Medicare is just federally funded. Medicaid is state and federally funded. And that's more for a lot of pregnant women might use it, or low income families use it. And with Medicaid, that's state and federal, usually you pay little or nothing for coverage. And I think Medicare, which is for elderly people or disabled, you pay deductibles, and that covers part of your coverage cost. So really the only difference between the two is who the type of person that uses them and how much it actually covers for you. Yeah, but that's the difference between what they're supposed to cover as far as how that works. But...
So the reason why it doesn't work is because of the government subsidizing things, right? Or is that just one reason?
Well, the reason why it doesn't work is that it then incentivizes healthcare companies to charge more money because then the government is going to subsidize more of the cost. So either way, they get paid. It's just how.
What was that? They get paid how much?
Well, I said either way they get paid, it just depends on how they get paid. Through the taxpayer or through your wallet.
So that explains why that, what was he called? You know that guy who raised the cost of certain, was it AIDS drugs? It's like some exponential level. Was that a reason why he did that? Because the government subsidised something, which made him increase the cost exponentially?
Well, that's more of an intellectual property problem, which is the next topic, which we can get into. Yeah.
Do you want to get into that then? Or do you have more things you want to say?
Well, unless you want to go and say anything about like the NHS and why exactly you think it doesn't work.
It's mainly just primarily how it's run. It's run through trusts, and the people who run it are not doctors, they are not nurses, they are not midwives or anything like that. They are bureaucrats, and what they say goes in regards to the trusts that they run, and they're very irresponsible with it. And another thing is they also have to some extent follow guidelines set by the government, which means there's lots of red tape and funding is not allocated in the way it should be and things like that. It's mainly how it's run, not the quality, not necessarily the quality, and also the waiting lists are a massive issue. I mean, that's obviously a typical thing, but that's the trade-off you make if you want a nationalised service anyway, I think. But
yeah,
it's mainly just how it's ran. That's really what it is. And eventually, the way it's ran, that attitude. Oh, here he is.
Oh,
here he
great.
is, people. The ice cream man is here. But anyway, that attitude that they run it with seeps into the lower levels, and it just ruins things. That's really my gripe with it. And also, I think it's a drain as well on resources when it could be ran better to be less of a drain, I think. But I don't know. Let's move on to intellectual property, right?
Good old IP protection.
IP?
I'm actually, despite the fact that I'm a minarchist who's very close to being an ANCAP, still in favor of IP laws. But it's more out of a pragmatic sense because, well, IP protection is what builds the U.S. Into an industrial power in the first place. And because we now have relaxed those laws so much, that's why we just don't have much business going on, at least manufacturing-wise anymore, because, well, you can just get your stuff stolen.
I see, Mac, you're not really in favour of that. Are you one of the, well, I don't know, are you one of those ANCAPs against IP, or are you for it, or...?
Well, I don't consider IP to be a legitimate property right, so I'm against it, but to be completely honest, I am not as educated on why and why not. So
why would you say it's not legitimate property?
Well, from my perspective, and I believe this is Rothbard's perspective as well, it's basically the fact that property rights just specify who owns and who has the right to control scarce resources. So as far as IP goes, when you start saying you believe in intellectual property, you're not just saying who owns it. So like Chicago pointed out, minarchists, some of them believe in it because they think, well, then someone can steal an idea from you or steal something you've come up with. But that also means that you control that specific. So that's why I personally have a problem with it.
See, I would say
there's other arguments for and against it as well.
For the counterpoint, I would actually say that intellectual property does not mean that you fully control every single thing involving that idea. In fact, people can actually go and then take your idea, improve upon it, and then have it become a new IP protected thing. Which is exactly what happens during the 19th century in the US. I mean, just look at
Yeah,
the
I guess-
automobile, for example.
Yeah, I guess that would just depend on like what exactly you're talking about intellectual property wise and how you can improve upon things. Because like you just said, like with automobiles, if you improve upon something enough to a degree, then you have your own intellectual property protected. But so I see where you're coming.
So it doesn't stifle innovation. To me, it actually encourages it because then it means inventors can go and profit off of their ideas and not just have it be stolen by someone else.
Yeah, and I would say that IP is property because to me, because it kind of, if you say it's not property, it kind of contradicts, your body. This might be going a bit philosophically, what is mind and what is matter and all that. But if you believe that your body, yeah, I know. That's we're debating the forms and things like that. But anyway, so if your body is your property, which we all agree with, I assume, right?
Yeah.
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 Then how come the products of your own mind, which comes from, well, I mean, again, it depends on what you think the mind is, but to me, your mind is part of your body, because it comes from your brain. You think, therefore you are, right? If it comes from your brain, then you technically should be able to own that idea, or at the very least have a patent or something like that, because you thought of that, your mind is your own, and the idea is your own, therefore you should have a right to profit off it, if it's profitable, that is. And
there's also the sheer nuanced nature of IP laws, which is why it takes so long to read through them.
Although I do think that
it's actually one of the few laws that I agree that it should be very, very long and because then it shows what exactly you can and cannot do, and it prevents people from abusing IP.
Although there is,
for example, the person who jacked up prices on the one AIDS medicine.
Yeah,
that was actually an abuse of IP, and he was then challenged into torts and law.
What was he, Schmelly? I forgot his name. Schmolly. I forgot his name.
I don't know, I just know that he sounded like a Monopoly villain.
Yeah, he had the most punchable face as well. Loads of people defended him as well. I don't know if it's because he was a meme, because he was a bit of a meme, but I honestly couldn't think even at the time. Even though I didn't know why he was really... he was being charged, and I now know it's IP law. Even then I thought, well, there's a reason here, and he's obviously broken the law. And it's pretty... Even if he didn't break the law, it's morally unjustifiable. But whatever, but...
so there's a very nuanced way to go and look at IP, which I encourage people to go and do. It's not really a black and white thing. It's a lot of shades of gray.
There is the death of the author.
At least 50, in fact. And I'm never making that joke again.
How dare you. Stop it. But anyway, there is the idea that... I know the death of the author is about how we interpret media and stuff like that, but there is a literal law thing with that in regards to the public domain, which has to do with IP. Like, I personally think things should go into the public domain after a certain amount of time, unless the person's estate wants to keep it. Maybe he's decreed, I want this to be with my ancestors forever long they live, for example.
Yeah.
Which should be allowed because it's your property, you do what you wish. But say if the estate...
Yeah, you can go and have your descendants inherit your IP, but you also have to go and every now and then renew it. And if they don't, well, tough luck.
And so say, for example, all his descendants die, then it should go public domain when its time is up. Or maybe...
unless the last descendants then wills it to someone else. Then it goes to them.
Yeah. Very true, yeah. That's how it should work, but it doesn't, because Disney is just abusing it. But I don't quite understand how they do it, though.
I actually have to research a lot more into Disney's IP ownership of Mickey Mouse.
But what I do know is that there's
because I also know full well what's going to happen as soon as they no longer own Mickey Mouse, and I'm going to be terrified at that result. Which, if I talk about it, you're definitely not going to be monetized.
Definitely, yeah. I mean,
so
wasn't he going to be public domain this decade? Was he?
He was actually supposed to be public domain this year.
Wow. Do you know he shares my birthday?
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, because Steamboat Willie wasn't the first they'd made, but it was the first they'd released. They have things in the pipeline, don't they? I think it was the second they'd made, but the first they released, and they released it November 18th, 1928. Wait, let me have a look. Steamboat. Yes, got it right. Woo! Get me with my brain.
Nice.
Big brain remembering dates. Anyway, what have we got left?
And the last one,
Hey.
infrastructure.
I told you we'd make it.
Roads.
Roads.
Yep, roads.
The ANCAP
To quote
dreaded
Eric
enemy.
July, fuck your whole ass roads.
Hippity hoppity.
have to put that on a
Roads are
shirt.
government property. Alright, go on. Give us infrastructure.
Well, infrastructure, you really, really do not need a state for that.
Mm-hmm.
Even
Yeah.
for things that are so large like transcontinental rail lines. We built 2 of them without the state in Montana.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just feel like as far as infrastructure goes, this is, and so before I became libertarian, when I was like a nothing, apathetic centrist, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
I would always hear my libertarian friends be like, yeah, people are really obsessed with the roads. They're going to tell you what about the roads. And I'm like, shut up. No, they're not. That's a meme. I did not realize how much people attempt to make this argument as why the government should exist. Because there are some legitimate things I get people haven't researched into, so why would they, like privatizing police and military and stuff like that. Those are legitimate concerns. But to me, infrastructure, it just blows my mind because a lot of, well, at least in the Midwest, as far as what I know, a lot of companies are already contracted with the government. So they would just be contracted with other people and there would still be roads. So it's so funny to me that people can't seem to get past the roads, the bridges and all that, or maintaining them and stuff like that. Because to me, this is one of the easiest things to talk about as far as why we don't need government.
Well, and
upkeep
also, in
infrastructure.
fact, in the suburb that I used to live in Chicago, which was a very rich town that people might have heard of, called Naperville, yeah, they slightly privatized their infrastructure network, and that's why it is far better than all of the other suburbs that it connects to. Like, there were no potholes in Naperville when I was there, because they would constantly just be repairing everything, even the state's highways that went through. While if you went into, for example, Aurora, you'd immediately see potholes.
I personally don't see why the state shouldn't allow people to fix the roads, even if the state owns it. I mean, if you live in that community, you have a right to fix it. Like, for
It's
example,
also not even that challenging to make your own asphalt and then just fill a pothole with it and smooth it over.
I also think that councils in this country should, because of how they've done. Well, it depends where you live, but in a lot of councils nowadays, because of austerity, I think it was mainly austerity, but it might be something else. I think a lot of rubbish removal is I think nationalized, or at least the councils do it. I think they should allow private people to do it, because I'm waiting 2 weeks for them to do it, and that's far too long. It should be at least a week. And not only that, recently because of COVID, I think some of them weren't bothering to come to my area, so the bins were piling. Well, they pile up anyway, but it was worse than you could possibly imagine. I mean, I don't know if this has anything to do with infrastructure, but maybe it is, because you're still you got to clean the streets, right?
Well, I mean, waste management is a form of infrastructure, actually.
Well, they should just allow either the communities to hire people whenever they want, until the council lets come around, or just say no, we don't want you. But we've got this decent business here that's doing better.
Yeah.
But as far as I'm aware, I don't think there are. I mean, the private companies have their own tips and things, but they don't do house collections. And you'll get people who scrap merchants, but they don't clean you. They don't clean your bins.
But if you ask me, there's only really 2 parts of infrastructure that are somewhat hard to privatize, and it is maintaining airports and maintaining nuclear power plants.
I actually think airports probably, to some extent, should be nationalised just because of the border. It's the gateway to your country.
Well, with that, you can then just, have, for example, a TSA office in the airport. And then there you go. You can have the rest of it privatized and have the TSA, in fact, pay rent to the airport.
What about ICE? ICE, baby.
ICE? You can do the same thing. Have them pay rents to the airport.
That way they can never be removed.
Yeah, exactly.
Is there anything else
Something.
about... Go on then, sorry.
Sorry, just something kind of funny about going back to roads. Though I think we agree, I think, on that point.
Yeah.
But I recently found out, I got into an argument with someone months ago on Twitter, and so I started researching the history of roads because I wanted to know. And I didn't know, but apparently, I think it was like 1880s to like the early 19 somethings. There was a movement across the United States called the Good Road Movement, I think, is what it was called. And there was like a pamphlet called The Gospel of Good Roads because rural people were trying to advocate for states to start building up more infrastructure for them, like through the government, because they wanted to be able to get to the cities and have more opportunities and stuff like that. But I just thought that was really funny that a pamphlet existed called The Gospel of Good Roads. So
If you don't respond to Eric's July was just the gospel of good roads.
hey, you should check out the gospel. And like the fact that it was said the gospel really triggered me. I was like, oh my gosh. So apparently people's obsessions with roads is not new, is what I'm saying.
This state is a religion.
Well, apparently...
Yeah, quite literally, yeah. The gospel.
The gospel according to the good road.
But yeah, for the latter of the two things that I said, that there's a argument for for keeping nationalized, which is nuclear energy. The state of Illinois, somewhat funnily, actually disproves that because all of our power plants are privately run, and we have the most nuclear power plants in the entire country. In fact, the city of Chicago is powered by several of them.
Interesting. But anyway, anything else you want to add, or is that everything? As I can't think of it.
Well, unless you want me to talk about nuclear
my
waste
take
disposal.
Is that why not both with roads? Like, if the state can't do it, you should be able to, I was going to say defend then. I mean, fix your own road. And
Defend your roads.
Defend your road.
My grandpa...
Defend your road.
My grandpa actually lived where he lived in the neighborhood. They've moved now closer to me. But where they used to live, there was a private road behind their house. And he was the one that maintained it. And like he had a bobcat and he would pave it. So like anytime anybody ever questions if I'm libertarian, I'm just like, did you know my grandpa built his own road? So I think I agree with that. Like people should just be able to maintain their own stuff. And I think it's kind of silly that there's barriers preventing people from actually improving their own infrastructure in their neighborhoods too.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I'm more in the middle, I'd say. But I think we've covered everything. Everything's been done.
Yep.
It's been a much better.
Yeah.
It's been a much better episode than the last episode. But anyway.
Oh, no.
Definitely, because we've lasted more than 20 minutes.
Anyway, we've been thinking about rectifying such issues if anything like that should arise. And I'll leave it up to the people in the comments. You won't be able to do it in the chat, but in the comments you should. I encourage you to comment if these are good ideas. Maybe I'll create a straw poll or something like that on Twitter. But we were thinking about doing pre-recorded episodes, kind of like how Dev does Dumping with Scrump. It won't be for guests, although I think the reason why we've had a lot of connection issues is because my main dongle, which is a really good dongle, broke, and I need to order a new one when I get paid next week. But
I think dongle's now my new favorite word.
Well, a guy got sacked for making a dongle joke years ago. But
What?
yeah, he did. This is one of the first cases of somebody being cancelled.
Oh, the absolute state of modern Britain.
No, this was in America.
Even worse.
But anyway, what do you guys think? Tell me, should we do pre-recorded ones when it's just the three of us, me, Chicago, and Alkazai? Maybe we could bring in the guests where, for example, the time zone is too crazy for a stream, for example. But I'll leave it up to you guys. Because I think it could work. We might trial it at some point.
I'm fine either way, my dude.
We'll do a trial
I'm
version.
fine either way, but I would... Yeah, we'll need to do a trial episode before I actually have an opinion on this.
Mm-hmm. Is your dongle big or small? It's a big one, Fox Striker.
I think I just saw the comment in the chat.
Anyway, it was big, but then it broke. So now it's bits and pieces.
I think as far as live streaming goes, I find like with my live streams on my channel, people actually do go back and watch them. So I feel like if you guys did pre-recorded ones, they would definitely like sit down and watch. Like I watch pre-recorded stuff all the time, podcasts, when I'm like just going through wanting to listen to stuff. So you could like do pre-recorded ones, and then every time you have a guest, do a live stream, and people could look forward to that.
That was my idea.
So
I'm gonna think about it all next week. But because then with pre-recorded, it doesn't need to be an hour long. It can be over 25 minutes. It can't be anything lower than 25, I think. Because have you heard a Baited podcast, for example?
Huh?
Baited podcast. It's one that Keemstar used to do with Colossal is Crazy.
No, I don't watch Keemstar.
No, but the podcast was good because they used to fight all the time. It was well funny. But anyway, no, it's true. No, but their episodes never went above well, sometimes it would go above an hour, but most of the time it was like 25 to 40 minutes, if that. And it would keep with the the short format, but it wouldn't be too short. So anyway, I think we should end it there. It's time to go to the last words. Chicago.
Well, my last words will be thank you for appearing, Kenziepuff, and this was actually quite fun.
Thanks, yeah. Thanks for having me on, guys. I appreciate it.
And how about,
yeah, of course.
And how about your last words, Kenziepuff?
My last words are thanks for having me on and privatize everything.
Yes.
Roads. And, my last words will be big irony.
Okay.